Hello there, sword friends. Today I'm going to tell you about this sword right here. This is a My Little Pony katana from DremSword. And before I get into the review, a couple quick disclaimers. First, this is a review sample. It was sent to me for free. If you think that makes me biased, you know at the start. And two, I asked for this. So the intention here is to make a custom My Little Pony katana. If you don't like the way this looks, know that I had a hand in kind of picking out the style and flavor. If you don't like it, it's more my fault than DremSword's. I also should note I studied Japanese swordsmanship, and the goal of this project was one, to make a My Little Pony katana, but also something that paid respect both to the community of folks that actually like My Little Pony. If you don't happen to be among them, that's fine. But if you're a brony, if you're a person that likes both katanas and My Little Pony, I don't want you to think that this was making fun of you, right? Also, I didn't want it to stand out as a My Little Pony katana in the dojo. This, you might notice, might stand out, but it's not because it's a My Little Pony katana, though I'll touch on that a little bit later. Anyway, that was some of the goal. I'll talk about the story that brought me there in just a moment. The last thing I want to give you as a disclaimer is that this is $208, which means that it is not a particularly expensive sword. It's accessible. It's kind of towards the entry-level price point. And if you are expecting the world, well, you're not going to get it for $208. But you do get some decent stuff, and I intend to cover it here. But just set your expectations at a reasonable level, because $208 doesn't get you a whole lot. I think it actually gets you pretty good value here, spoiler, but at the same time, it's not going to be like a $10,000 sword. So I'll start with, why did I make a My Little Pony katana? Well, why did I have somebody else make a My Little Pony katana? So as the story goes, I frequently engage in custom sword projects. The person that does the majority of that work for me often gave me some cautionary guidance that, hey Matt, some of your more bold designs, so some of the more flamboyant things you want done are going to turn this project into a My Little Pony katana. It was always the dare not go area. And one day, after having done enough custom swords, I thought, you know, why don't I just do a My Little Pony katana? And the mystery man in black didn't seem to say no right away, so I went down the path of designing some swords, and those designs were maybe a little bit too ambitious for what could be taken on easily. I struggled to find fittings. I really struggled to get the project moving, and this is the first attempt, frankly, at a My Little Pony katana, at least from anything I've done. And finding fittings was always the stopping point. Getting something that actually matched and was My Little Pony-esque, or at least in the way my brain worked, just didn't work out. But as companies reached out and said, hey, what about a review sample? What do you think? In the back of my mind, I always thought, maybe it's time to ask them for a My Little Pony katana. And when I reached out and asked DremSword about a review sample, and they said, how about a design? And I said, you know, how about a My Little Pony katana? They didn't say no and seemed interested in doing the project. And so that is where this one came out. Now, my daughter was a fan of My Little Pony. Her favorite character was Rainbow Dash. And initially, that was the sword that I kind of designed, was something Rainbow Dashy. But getting the colors right is a little more challenging. The one for this project was a character called Rarity, who has a kind of a purple and a white theme, and then has, they're called cutie marks. It's like a lower back tattoo for ponies. But there's like a, for lack of a better word, a mon that is embossed on a number of different Japanese fittings. You see these little symbols, they're called mon, and they're sometimes stuck all over the sword. My favorite is a swirly mitsudome, though I don't know of a My Little Pony with that particular flavor. Rarities, though, are these three little triangles. And so there are only a couple things on this sword that really make it a My Little Pony katana, and they don't stand too proud. So I think this sword is bold, but in the dojo, it might look more like a pick-me sword because of the white scabbard and the purple. It's a very bold look, but not because it stands out as a My Little Pony katana. Anyway, reached out to DremSword, gave some feedback on what I would like to do. We reached for what was possible. I tried to pick as many. I tried to pick a pony with a color scheme that would work with the existing fittings. That's why Rarity was chosen. And then I chose a saya that was off the shelf. I think simple white might have been better, but that wasn't an option. The purple was the standard option. The same was a standard option. The only two kind of real differences are the saya had to be custom made, and then the minuki had to be tracked down. So I'll talk about those when I get there, but those are the only two things that are separate from what you could buy off the shelf. So if you like this design, but would rather it not be based on My Little Pony, there's some good news. You can absolutely do that. It's probably even going to be a little bit less money. Anyway, that's the story of why I chose a My Little Pony katana. My daughter used to be a fan of the show. I talked about doing it. The My Little Pony community of folks there seems to be actually some overlap between people that like swords and My Little Pony, and they were very respectful and helpful and interested in seeing the media that they love represented in a cool Japanese style sword. And that touched me. I wanted to make something that was respectful of the media, respectful of the characters, and respectful of the sword, and something that would blend in and be able to be used in a dojo without specifically calling you out as a brony without those people, without looking at specific designs and being very close to the sword. So anyway, with that said, I'm going to talk about the fits and features, the bits and bobs, and then I'll use it. I'll talk about how it functioned in the dojo when I used it in cutting and for Iaido and whatnot, and then I'll tell you if I think it's worth it or not, though it's probably evident at this point. Anyway, the Kashra. I chose a simple kind of stippled Kashra at the end here. It's held on, and I haven't used this sword as much for Iaido as I typically do in these reviews. I don't know that a person buying a My Little Pony katana is going to use it day in and day out for Iaido, but I can say that the Kashra, the transitions aren't great. There's a little bit of a lip here. That's not uncommon in most swords, honestly, frankly, but it's not done too terribly poorly here. I didn't find that it created a hot spot or irritation. It just isn't as well done as it could be. Can you get it better done in $200? Probably. Can't necessarily point to where. Probably there are a few companies out there. At the same time, more companies tend to have these overlaps or even have loose Kashra than you see here. So I would put this actually above average, despite the fact that it has room for improvement. The Kashra wiggles. It's not like super glued on. It's the tension of the Ito that's holding it on, and it's held it on pretty well, I should say. The Ito itself will move if I push on it. Not a lot, though. And honestly, for, again, an entry-level sword without Hishigami, this is actually fitted pretty tight. I didn't notice that the Ito moved around through the course of using it. Again, I haven't used it as much as I typically do for these reviews, but I have used it quite a bit, and it's held on pretty well. The diamonds have stayed relatively preserved. The Samegawa skin isn't a really high-end one. Again, not expecting that for this money, but I do see reasonably large nodules. I don't make out that there are splits or anything like that. If this is a lower quality skin, it's been masqueraded as something better than it is quite well. Sometimes you'll see splits, you'll see the corner of the wood poking out, you might see staining in the Samegawa. I don't notice any of that. The shape of the handle as well is really quite comfortable. I honestly don't mind it. I don't mind it at all. It indexes quite well. It thins out. It's really quite comfortable actually to use, and it has a handsome shape. It cants off and it has a little bit of swell. Anyway, the Menuki are the first part that I'll mention is the My Little Pony. I asked for some earrings or pendants or something like that that would show a My Little Pony thing. Now, I think this could be supplemented with some custom Menuki and the 3 diamond kind of symbol of Rarity, the pony, but this is more or less an earring with Rarity or a pendant of some kind with the pony placed in as Menuki. It's the most standout thing that would identify this as a My Little Pony katana, and they are on either side, fit in the normal place for Menuki. There's 2 Makugi pegs that are in here, and then as we move up to the Fuchi, it doesn't have the same transition issues. The quality of the Fuchi is not bad. I do make out some casting lines. It's a simple stippled texture. There wasn't anything that stood out as My Little Pony or that worked any better. So I tried to find something that didn't detract from the theme rather than something that added to it, because something that told the story of My Little Pony was not present in the Fuchi Kashra. The Subba is the next bit, and this is a custom Subba. It's a simple cutout of a Subba, and the 3 diamond pattern of Rarity's cutie mark is placed in the normal place that I put a lot of things, or that you would commonly see cutouts for Moan, just kind of at the 10 o'clock or 2 o'clock position. Anyway, this is the only other thing that really stands out as a My Little Pony thing. There are some things that I might add. I'll talk about those at the end, but this is subtle, and I think if you are a fan of any particular show, if there's something that inspired you and you'd like to work in your katana, then getting the symbol cut in on the Subba is a subtle nod to do that, and I think it came out pretty well here and didn't seem to add to the cost too much. This sword, I imagine, could be had for less money without the adornments of My Little Pony, but these 2 little touches, one, don't seem to stand out a whole lot as a My Little Pony katana. At the same time, they certainly are a nod to the character that they're trying to, or that they're inspired by. Moving down to the Saya, this is a white. It has this kind of smoky texture over it. I think I'd like it more if it were just white, or maybe if it had a purple ring around it, something like the mane, but at the same time, a custom painted scabbard would cost more money, and that wasn't an option here. Other things that I wouldn't have mind doing is if it was white and had like a purple Samegawa half wrap, that would have been kind of nice as well. But some integration of white and purple with a custom painted scabbard I think would have looked nice. Just wasn't an option here, and would, I imagine, could be something that DremSword could provide to you, just would likely add to the cost. This was trying to keep the cost low, and this was the closest white scabbard that they had. I believe they might have actually had a plain white one. I don't know why I didn't choose that, but sometimes it would say white causes lots of things to stand out, so you can see flaws and dirt and things like that a little easier. There were shirodome that were provided. They came out. I don't necessarily like that, but that's how they are quite commonly, and I don't know that you necessarily mind on this. I chose a purple Sageo, and it seems to match reasonably well, and I think generally does the job of the color scheme. In terms of how they're tensioned, it fit quite well. It's not particularly raspy for an inexpensive scabbard. There's no horn parts on this, incidentally, no horn koiguchi, kurigata, kojiri, any of that kind of stuff, but it is fit reasonably well. It's tensioned reasonably well. It doesn't fall out, but with a simple push of the thumb, it draws and deploys. The blade is, I believe, 9260 or 1060. It's a simple steel. I can't actually recall what steel it is, but it is a through-hardened blade. There's no hamon, there's no special polish. It's a simple tool-looking blade, but what is here is well done. The lines on the blade are crisp and clean. The polish doesn't have any kind of ripples in the surface, and the blade came very, very sharp. Surprisingly sharp, actually, and I'll talk about that when I get to the cutting. There was an impressive level of sharpness and capability that came with this sword. It's very simple looking. It looks like the quintessential katana, at least in terms of blade, no bohi. Some of those options could be added. I'd imagine you could choose a different theme or style of blade if you wanted. There's just not much to talk about here. It's a simple mirror polish and a through-hardened blade. There's not a lot of features to talk about or artistic stuff that is interesting in the sword. Those are options that, again, I think could be added by DremSword. They would just cost more money. The last bit I forgot to mention is the habaki. Simple brass habaki, does the job, and it fits reasonably well, but there's not a lot to talk about. It's the same thing that you may have seen on a number of other swords. It does what it's supposed to do here, though. It tensions correctly, doesn't rattle, does the thing that it's supposed to do. Anyway, that's the rundown of the sword. I'll talk about using it now. So in the process of doing EI with it, I actually found it to be surprisingly nice. And my bar is actually kind of high for these swords in the $200 price point. I know that that price point, that entry-level price point, has moved around some with the tariffs and inflation and stuff like that. What used to be $100 is probably now $200. But you can actually get some decent swords in this price that function and work reasonably well. This draws and sheathes reasonably well. It feels not too bad in the hand. It indexes well. The ito is reasonably tight. As a practitioner's tool, there wasn't anything that really stood out as problematic. It overall was a reasonable tool to do iaido with if you want to practice with a sharp sword anyway, and you're on a budget. Nothing from the My Little Pony stuff stood out, and nothing ground on my hands over here. The Minuki didn't feel bad. One of them has a slight ledge that stands a little bit proud on the ito. I could feel it in my hand, but it didn't cause me any discomfort. And overall, it was reasonably nice to work with. The only thing that really stood out was the sword. And not because it's My Little Pony katana, but because it has a very bold white scabbard and kind of bright purple ito. And those look like a bit of a pick-me sword, something that stands out very proud in the dojo in contrast to the other kind of more, well, what could be typical looking design, black on black with some blacky black scabbards. This one stands out, but nobody inherently said that's a My Little Pony katana until they showed it to them. They looked and they said, is this the My Little Pony katana, Matt? They knew I was going to be making one eventually. So it didn't surprise them that this was the one, but it didn't immediately jump out as a My Little Pony sword in the dojo. In terms of practicing with it, though, it was actually a better tool than I expected. A lot of times when you get these kind of novelty swords, they miss the mark in terms of practicing, and it was nice to say that this didn't. It certainly did the job that it was supposed to do. Is it the best tool in the world? No, not even a little. But is it a good tool for $208? Yeah, I would be happy to train with it if I paid that much money. The next bit I'll talk about is cutting. Now, I haven't gotten a chance to cut a lot with this sword, but I did cut tatami mats in class, and it did a great job, honestly, surprisingly so. And you can kind of tell that by my reactions here. So I haven't cut water bottles and the like with this sword. I could, but I think cutting tatami mats is going to be sufficient here. The blade is a through-hardened 9260 spring steel. If I go and whack it on a metal pole, eventually it's going to break. If I cut the neck of water bottles, it might chip or something like that. At the same time, it seemed to hold up through the tatami mats well, and there were some nice things to say about it here. So one, it was easy to control. Again, the benefits that I noted about it from a practitioner standpoint certainly stood out when I went to cut. I could index it well, I felt in control, it didn't slip around in my hand, there was no uncomfortable hot spots, but it also cut really well. It cut tatami surprisingly well. And the first couple mats, I'll note that they were squeedle mats in the sense that they were used Japanese tatami mats, but I missed class a couple times. They'd been like soaking in the sun for hours. I dried them out and like re-soaked them for another class, and then like I poured some bleach in the water before class. So they were very, even though they're used Japanese tatami mats, and even those usually tend to be harder to cut, these were pretty soft mats. That said, it still cut through them quite well. The teacher at the end though said, how about I grab some other mat scraps from other people's on the floor that are more robust and more indicative of what you would expect from a used Japanese tatami mat. And I was able to pull off cuts I can't frankly usually pull off. There was a chunk of mat set on top that was not pegged or not kind of stuck into the stand, and I was able to cut it while leaving the remnant staying on what was left of my tatami mat. That is not something I can usually do. It's not something you typically see in most people's cutting at the dojo. I was very surprised, and what that tells me is that the sword is certainly more capable than cutting through the garbage mats that I had, but it came with a level of sharpness that allowed me to do some cutting feats that I can't usually pull off, and it did them quite well. It was really, really sharp, and it moved through those tatami mats quite well in honestly a way that was surprising. I wasn't expecting that on a $200 sword. I certainly wasn't expecting it on the My Little Pony katana. So very sharp, very effective. If I went out in the backyard, it would cut through, softer bottles and stuff like that quite well. I would expect though, and this is speculation because I haven't tested it, if I go and actually hit it on the neck of a bottle with a really, really sharp edge, sometimes those can diminish more quickly or be damaged by the neck of water bottles or thick plastic more easily. Like I said, this isn't sold as an indestructible sword, so I imagine if I go abuse it, it's going to show what would happen with that abuse and probably degrade the way that you would expect. But it's not a dull sword. It didn't rust or chip or have any problems cutting tatami mats. So anyway, that's what I did for cutting, where it surprised me, it was a surprisingly effective cutter, and it kind of rose a few eyebrows. Mine were not the only eyebrows to be raised by the effectiveness of the My Little Pony katana cutting that day. Now, with all that said, I will wrap it up here and tell you, do I personally think the sword is worth it or not? For me, yes. I would not necessarily buy it because I am not a My Little Pony fan. However, if you were a My Little Pony fan, Rarity in particular, I think this is a reasonable offer for the money. For $208, I got something that was custom. It, I think, did the job. If you're a My Little Pony fan, let me know in the comments below if you feel insulted by my attempt to make a katana based on the character Rarity. But I think it did the job that I was after. I don't feel like I overreached and made fun of the audience. And I think the sword is very effective and honestly a good value for not a My Little Pony katana. If you wanted to subtract the My Little Pony theme, I think it would still be a fair sword at $208. It draws and sheathes well, it's handsome, it's generally fit together quite well, and it's certainly very effective in the use. Making a My Little Pony sword, though, with all of these custom touches, in that price point is actually kind of surprising. And I think if you are looking for a sword that has some custom flair to it that is outside the norm of what you can normally pick from the options, this is a great value, frankly. If you wanted to make a different pony katana, you could reach out to DremSword and ask them what their capabilities are on making one after your favorite character. Anyway, yes would be the short answer. Maybe not for me because, again, I'm not a big fan of My Little Pony. If I wanted to keep a sword around, it would probably be Rainbow Dash for my daughter, but I do think this represents a great value and they did a solid job with the sword. Now, the last thing I'll mention is where I have some concern. When I initially noted that DremSword had made me a review sample and that I'd be doing something, I got a few people that reached out and said they had some concerns around the customer care that they had gotten after their purchase. I've had other people incidentally reach out and say they're very happy with their DremSwords, but there have been folks that have had one problem or another and don't seem particularly satisfied with the outcome provided by DremSword. I did talk to them about this and they do seem committed to customer service. They said, hey, if it's within our power to fix, we will. We try to take care of customers, but do know that they seem a little less apt to more or less steeply discount the sword or provide a new one in the event that there is some failure that may be, frankly, outside your capability of fixing. So they mentioned sometimes they can send a new handle, sometimes they can provide a new sword depending on the level of condition. But what I've heard is that if there are minor blemishes, issues, or minor things, that they're hoping that you're going to be able to take a little bit more of a hands-on approach in fixing them. If that's something that concerns you, I would reach out to them and clarify what your expectations are so nobody's disappointed. It does seem like there were some folks that expected either a brand new sword given the challenges that they had, or a bigger discount. And I'm calling it out because it's rare that folks reach out to me and provide this kind of feedback when I note one sword. So it did seem like a little bit of a red flag. In the conversations I've had with them, it doesn't seem like it's that big a concern. However, if you have a concern around it, I would just clarify what happens if X, Y, and Z. If a little spot of rust is a deal breaker for you, what would DremSword provide in the event that you see a problem with the sword? So that's the only cautionary bit I can provide to you. That's all I've got for this video, though. I do want to thank the folks at DremSword for providing this review sample for me. It's been fun to finally have a My Little Pony katana. If you are a fan of the show, a fan of the sword, tell me what you think. Did I do a passable job of making a sword that doesn't stand out immediately as a My Little Pony katana, even though it stands out? Did I pay respect to the character? I'm curious about your thoughts. Let me know. That's all I've got, though. Cheers, and thanks for watching.